Y'all, I'm about to sweat to death up here. Is it hot in here? Oh, well, good. Hey, I told him I'd check. I'm glad he remembered, because it would have been bad if I had promised that I would remember it and then didn't. So, awesome. Good for him. I have a confession to make, which I just realized I don't actually know your name. You're just Ross's mom to me, because that's all I've ever heard you called. Griselle. All right, I have a confession to make. You gave me that stylus last week, and I've already lost it. Yeah. Yeah. So last week, after I was fighting with this iPad, she brought me a stylus and was like, "Yeah, I have that too. So you can use this since you're all thumbs." And well, don't know where it went. So I did recently discover though that I have ADHD, and what I didn't know is that my whole life I was missing out on this fantastic excuse for so many things. So all right. So I was going to, I had in mind to kind of move towards, today's Palm Sunday, and that's the Sunday before Easter for you heathens. And I know, I saw some of you like, okay. What? And anyway, so I was going to work on, an Easter-themed type of deal like most churches do, and we're working towards Easter and all that. And I just completely drew a blank on that and ended up somewhere completely different. We can never just be a normal church. So found myself drawn towards a different topic this week, which is the topic of exile, which isn't very Eastery, but we'll see how it plays. So before we go there, though, I want to recap on last week. I should probably get my slides up. Hey, looky there. All right. Last week, I challenged how we see God, and more importantly and more specifically, how we see what He wants from us. And if you guys weren't here, y'all can go back and watch that on the live stream. I challenged our perceptions about God and what He wants from us, and we talked about like this Sunday best that we often bring as an offering, if you will. We show up to circles of spirituality, we show up to church, and when we approach God Himself with this, I need to put on my Sunday best, that we go to church on Easter Sunday and we put on our best dress, and we show up with our best look. And it's like this, I'm going to call it this, it's like this impersonation of what we think God wants from us. What we've picked up that church has taught us, or maybe family has taught us, or whatever. We've got this vision, and I talked about that compost guy, that seedy old compost guy last week, that asked what I did, and I said, well, I do this and that, and I'm a pastor, and then he was like, oh, sorry, if I'd known you were religious, I wouldn't have been saying those things. And that's kind of, and I shared that last week, because that's kind of how we approach God. Like, we're going to clean up our act, and we're going to put on this, I call it our Sunday best. We're going to offer that to God because that's what we think He wants from us. We think He wants this version of us. We think He's pleased with this version of us, and so that's what we offer. And then the real us with real issues that's not at all put together and doesn't at all look like that, we tend to want to leave it home. We tend to segment that part of our life off and live it separately. You know what I'm talking about? And it just doesn't work very well. And so I began to, last week, challenge us on this, that the real God, to suggest that the real God, the real Jesus, the real point of the gospel is this God that wants our real selves, not this fabricated version of us, not this churchy, starchy, like, I think sometimes God probably thinks church is really starchy too, and that, I like that thought, that maybe God also finds church a little bit dormant sometimes as well, because that's not what He's after. I like to picture this God that would rather sit around the campfire in shorts and a t-shirt and interact with the real you, not this put-on version of you that we often try to be to make Him happy. And that's where we end up in those dry places where the relationship just feels dead and empty and we just don't feel filled. We feel like failures for not feeling filled. You know what I mean? We show up and we do Bible time, we go away with nothing, and it's like, well, must be me, I must be doing something wrong or whatever. You know what I'm talking about? And I said last week, I think this is where we get our eyes so much on us and what we're supposed to be and what God wants us to be and what's going to make Him happy for us to be, and we lose the fact that God wants to connect with our real, raw selves. I talked about those two soils, this dry soil this dry, tidy soil that we think He wants, when what He really wants is that fertile, rich, composty, stinky, wormy soil that we don't think He wants and we don't think belongs in His presence, but that's what He's after. That's the heart he wants to heal. That's the soil that he can plant seeds in that will grow, right? I want to share with you Psalms 51, 16 through 17. I was looking at this week, and it really says what we were talking about last week. David, speaking for God, says, to God, says, you do not desire a sacrifice. The Israelites at that time lived within this covenant relationship of law with God, where they had all of these things that they did that were meant to be things and arenas in which they interacted with God, but they became, just like they so often become for us, they became just rituals. They became just routines that they went through, offering of sacrifices and these festivals and all this stuff. And guess what happened? When it became a dead, dry routine, they quit doing it. They stopped connecting with God in it. It didn't impact their real lives. It was just some place they went to try to make God happy, to cast some penny in a well, and so they quit doing it, and they quit doing these festivals, and they fell out of the habit, right? Just like we do when there isn't life in it. You do not desire a sacrifice, or I would offer one. You don't want a burnt offering. The sacrifice you desire is a broken spirit. You will not reject a broken and repentant heart, oh God. Now, do y'all remember last week the verse we had with in the Bible? It's the tax collector and the Pharisee coming. And of course, I made it the pastor and bail bondsman? Yeah, to make it more real for us. And which one's heart did God smile on? Which one's heart did God connect with? Which one went home, the Bible says, justified before God? The one with the real, humble, honest, transparent, oh God, I am a sinner, right? That's what God is after. That is the sacrifice he desires. It's the real you showing up and existing in real relationship with him without all this adornment, without all this extra that we try to make. You know what I'm saying? All right, I quit beating the horse. I bring all that up. I go back through all of that because I want us to carry that perspective that we got last week. I want us to carry that into today, which, can I just say, that's the foundation. Everything we talk about, everything we do involving our spiritual walk, involving our faith journey, starts with having the right lens through which we see God. It's like I said last week, if he's just some angry God up in the sky, if he's some high standard that we have to adhere to, then that's the way we're going to interact with him. We're going to try to interact with that God in a number of ways that we've been taught. But we've got to, from the ground floor, come to see God for what he really is and understand what he really wants with us, and understand what his heart really is, because everything is built on that. And it's like a house. If that piece of the foundation is a little bit out of whack, everything reflects it going up. The sheetrock, the doors, the floors, everything reflects that discrepancy. It's the exact same way in our relationship with God. If the foundation there, if what we even think he's about is off, everything's going to reflect it. And so I ask that we keep last week in mind as we go into today, talking about exile. Now, when we look at exile in the Bible, there's so many different analogies and parallels, and y'all know I don't dig in a whole lot to some of that. I don't nerd out on that stuff a super amount. I kind of wish I did more. I try to keep things pretty real, but there's all kinds of themes and analogies of exile in the Bible, even down to the big picture, we're all in exile since we were banished out of the garden, humanity is in a fallen condition, a fallen state, right? We live in a fallen world and we live in exile in it. And one day, when Jesus returns, then we will be removed from that exile back into the new heaven, the new earth, the new kingdom, right? So even there, you have this big picture theme of exile. But the exile that I'm talking about today is more on a personal level. In a more personal sense, and I'm going to define it this way: exile, a place or position where we've lost access to something. This is kind of like, I want to be over there. I want to be over there, but I'm stuck here. I can't be over there. I'm not allowed to be over there. I'm restricted from being over there. I'm stuck in this place when I want to be in that place. That's kind of the heart behind exile. It's living outside of the land of promise, because we obviously all know, most of us probably know the Israel example where they live in rebellion, they follow other gods, and so they get drawn into exile where they're not getting to live in their land of promise. Now, try to follow the analogy that I'm drawing here. Not getting to live in our land of promise. God has spoken things over our life. God has spoken truths to us in His Word about the kind of life that we have the right to live, but we're not getting to do that right now because we're stuck in this place. Some of you guys today, a lot of you guys today, I think, are living in a place of exile, living in a season or a period of exile. That could look like, I want to be free, I want to do things my way, I want to get to make my own decisions, but I can't. I'm at safe haven. I don't get to make my own decisions. Exile. I want to maybe be in my kid's life, but there are factors that restrict me from being able to do so right now. I'm not allowed to be in that space. That's exile. I want to have a good, open relationship with my wife, but because of different things, we're in a place where her heart's kind of closed off to me right now. Exile, right? We're living outside of the land of promise. Now, fill in the blank with how that hits you. How that you feel like that relates to you, where you feel like you're at in that. I'm not going to go through every example I could think of. But are y'all kind of getting the picture of what exile can look like in our personal lives? Now, I want to bring this up. Here's where I want to start. We tend to see exile as a consequence for the bad kids. That's kind of how we tend to look at it. Like, you screwed up, the Israelites, you worshipped other gods, you rebelled against God, and so you got booted out of the promised land, and now you got to go live in exile. Consequence for the bad kids, right? Y'all know what I'm talking about? But just as I challenged our perspective last week, I want to challenge our perspective this week, because what I want to suggest to you guys, and I want us to try to look at it this way, that exile is not so much a consequence for the bad kids, although it certainly has a behavioral, consequential kind of element to it, but that exile is actually just a step in our walk of faith. In other words, I've come to think that I don't really think exile is entirely avoidable if we want to follow Jesus. If we want to walk in a flourishing relationship with Jesus and live a life defined by faith and all of those kinds of things, if we want to follow Jesus, I don't think exile is avoidable. I think it's part of His process. I think it's a step in our faith journey rather than maybe if I do all the things right, I can avoid getting kicked out of the promised land. Y'all see the difference there? It's a very important distinction. It's a very different perspective. I want to show you guys this. When we look at the Old Testament, we see all of these stories of faith that are like, Paul calls them in 1 Corinthians 10, examples. They were recorded for us as examples, these different stories of faith. And so there's all these stories of faith that are like little illustrations, if you will, of our spiritual walk. It's a story about somebody who lived and did things and went places and all of that, but in a greater sense, it's this picture of walking out our faith, right? And then, here's an easy example of that. How many sermons have you heard about the Israelites being called out of a land of slavery in Egypt, and all of that symbolism for us, being called out of that place and then led towards this land of promise. And in that process, they get taken through this journey in the wilderness where God works out there, where God challenges them and grows their faith, right? It's such a picture of our journey being called out of bondage towards a place of promise, and we're working it out in the middle, right? Walking it out with God. It's such a picture. And that's how all of these stories are. And so with that in mind, I will just ask you this. Find me a story in the Old Testament that does not involve some kind of season of exile. Some kind of period of exile. Find me one. Every one of these stories involves a period, a process of them being in exile from the land of promise that God has spoken over them. From the dream, from the promise, from the future, and they're in this place that looks the opposite of that. All of them. I want to show you guys a bunch of examples. I'm going to start with Jacob. Jacob in the Old Testament, running from Esau. Jacob's name means trickster or something along those lines. I hate to misquote. I'm not the most educated on this stuff. That's what Sunday school told me anyway. Jacob, he's tricky, and he deceives Esau, and he steals his birthright, and then he has to flee because Esau is, rightly, understandably, trying to think of the church way to put it, he's hacked off. And so Jacob has to flee his land of promise. He has to flee his home, and he has to flee to this place where he's living with these distant relatives in a place that's not his own, and tending flocks that aren't his own. He has to go into exile, right? Joseph's brothers sell him as a slave into Egypt, and he has to go, again, away from his home, away from his land of promise, and he has to go into Egypt, and he's sold as a slave there. He becomes a slave in Potiphar's house. He gets accused of something he didn't do. He gets thrown in jail. He lives in jail for many, many years. exile, right? Moses feels this draw, this call of God on his life to be instrumental in setting the Israelites free in Egypt. And he goes out there, as we were talking about a couple weeks ago, and he's going to get it done. He's going to do it himself type of thing. And so he kills that Egyptian that's mishandling the Israelite. And then the next day, he's like getting up in the Israelite guy's business, trying to fix their relationship with each other, right? And it all goes sideways, and he has to flee. He has to go into exile to the land of Midian, a place that's not his own, right? I could just keep going. The Israelites, I just talked about them. They go through that desert trip. They get to the promised land, and they don't have the faith to walk in. They're like, no, these giants are going to wipe us out. God's not going to take care of us here. And because of their lack of faith, they've got to go wander in the desert for 40 years in exile as God raises up a new generation and a new generation of faith that will believe him and go in and take the promised land. David wrote the Psalms. He spent a huge portion of his youth in a place of exile, running from Saul, who's trying to kill him, right? And then, of course, the Israelites all throughout, all the way to Jesus, as they continually worship other gods and then get exiled to Babylon and all these countries that come in and take them captive. And right? Exile, all throughout the Bible. All of these stories involve seasons of exile. And I want us to see the pattern here. Things that are unrefined in each one of these individuals. Because each one of these individuals, Moses, Joseph, David, each one of them had things within them that weren't quite right, that were just a little broken. And they made decisions. Jacob tricks Esau, like Joseph flaunts his specialness in front of his brothers. They kind of did things that landed them, and it's not that it was their fault, but it landed them in positions of exile. So I want us to see the pattern. Things that are unrefined within us leading to decisions and choices that place us in positions of exile where God refines us. Do y'all see the pattern there? We're going to keep digging into this. I want you guys to see that none of those stories ended in exile. None of those stories ended in exile. Each one of those stories is a story of God pursuing somebody. It's not a story of God rejecting somebody that he's upset with. All of those people were smiled on by God, right? They play key roles in the Bible. They're people that God spoke promises over and brought those promises to pass in their lives. So again, I'm trying to reframe the way we look at exile, and I'm getting ahead of myself. So all right, reframing what exile is. I've got 4 things I'm going to go through here today to look at what exile is, what its purpose is in our life. The first one is kind of hard to get, and it kind of umbrellas all the others. And I hope you start to be able to see this as we go through this. But the first thing I want you to know is that exile is a place of love. It is a place where God is pursuing you. You aren't in exile because God has rejected you. You aren't in exile because God is angry with you. You're in exile because you are loved. And it is a place he is putting you to do some work. I'm getting ahead of myself. We're going to get into that. What we usually feel in exile is abandoned, right? We usually feel abandoned. Where is God? Where's this God that spoke these promises over my life? I think about Joseph, man, where are all those dreams you gave me? They're not working out very well here. Where is God? We usually feel abandoned, but in reality, we're being pursued. But I want to tell you, if you feel like the purpose of exile is for God to just get all of his anger out of his system, you know what I mean? Then you're very likely to miss the gift that he has for you in it. And it's really easy, because of how we've been taught to look at God, it's really easy, like you read the Old Testament is a great place for this. You read the prophets, and it sounds so much like God just bringing the Israelites out here and just beating the snot out of them because he's mad and he's angry, and he talks about being angry, right? And then, all right, now that my anger's out of the way, now that I've gotten all that out of my system, now I'll take you back. So it's really easy to look at it like that, to kind of see this harsh, angry God. But it's like I just said, consider that list above. Every one of those people are stories of God pursuing somebody and bringing about his promise in their life. Every one of those places of exile that I just shared with you in those individuals' lives were places where God refined and prepared them to occupy the promised land that he had spoken to them back here. If Joseph had not gone into that period of exile in his life, he would have never grown the capabilities. He would have thought he could have. He would have thought he was ready to walk into that reality that those dreams spoke of. But number one, he didn't even come close to understanding what those dreams were talking about. And number two, he was nowhere close to ready to be put in that position. There was a lot of refinement. There was a lot of stuff within Joseph that had to be dealt with. Hence the need for that place of exile. And God wasn't throwing Joseph in exile because he's like, oh, you think you're so special, pretty boy? Well, let me show you. That wasn't what he was doing at all. He was right there with him, taking him into this place where he was going to prepare him for what he had for him. Do y'all see that? Every one of these stories is that way. We don't look at these stories and go, oh, well, God really hates Moses. No, God speaks, Moses, my servant. David, man, the guy after my heart, I love that guy. All of these people were loved by God. All of these people were special in God's heart. And yet all of them experienced exile. So again, I'm beating this to death, but I'm just trying to challenge the thing that we think where it's like, oh, when I end up in a place where I'm not getting to live in the land of promise, where I've made mistakes that have landed me in this situation, that's just the consequence for the bad kids. We've got to get that out of our head, or we're going to miss the gift. All right, moving on to number 2. So exile is a place of love. Exile is a place that God leads us so we can encounter what isn't working. I want you guys to hear me on this one. When God leads us into exile, when you find yourself in a place of exile, there is something in your life that God has you there so you can encounter, that you would otherwise live alongside of, limp along with, and tolerate in your life. And the whole point of exile is, no. We're going to put you here. And we're going to put things in place where you don't have a choice about being here, because that's the only way you're ever going to address this. That's the only way you're ever going to encounter this. Because God is a God of love, He leads us into exile, a place of love, to help us encounter and process places in our hearts that are broken. I've seen this so many times, guys. I've seen this in my own life, in my own areas where I found myself in a place of exile, and I fought it. But at the end of the day, there was something that was broken inside of me that I wasn't even aware of. You know, we don't, normal just looks like what we're used to, right? And we tend to get around other people that look a lot like us, where environments, let's say, where we're comfortable. And it's so easy for things to be broken inside of us, for our hearts to be wounded in all these different ways, for all these things inside of us to be out of whack and cause us to be living destructive patterns and making destructive choices and not living as independent, the life more abundant and free that I get to choose, not living free in that way. We live in bondage to our own brokenness, and we'll never address it. And I've watched this time and again when God takes us and He puts us in these places of exile. When we finally get to the point that we quit kicking and screaming about it, He starts to work something beautiful in our hearts. He starts to help us encounter things that we've never seen before, that we've never realized before, and we never would have gone there without a significant period of exile. So exile is a place God leads us to encounter what isn't working. If you're in exile today, I just want to tell you, there's something there that He's after in you. There's something He's working on you in. So tune in. All right, moving forward. Number 3, exile is a place of healing relationship. Now, this is where it's going to start sounding a little weird. It's probably been months ago now, we did a series on the relationship we have with ourselves, and right there, that's where it starts sounding like psychobabble. But there's 3 arenas of a relationship. There's relationship with others, there's relationship with God, and there's relationship with ourselves. And I want to tell you guys, I have seen this oh my goodness. Just please hear me. The number one thing that is always messed up, the number one thing that is always broken when we look at our lives and we see junk there that we would rather not be there, when we look at our lives and we see reactions, defensiveness, the inability to sit in certain spaces without feeling attacked, you know what I'm talking about? Addictions. When we look at our life and we see these things that control us more than we control them, what I want to tell you is there's something broken in our relationship with ourselves. And I know that sounds weird. But there's things that we've learned to live with that we have no idea what it would look like to live without. There's things that we've learned, things that this world has taught us, ways that we've been broken that we've just learned to live with, and it feels totally normal. I'm going to keep going here. God leads us into exile to bring healing to these areas. Often these places of exile, it's kind of like, I love the thing about Joseph, it's kind of like there's a lot of things that have just been cut out of the way. There's a lot of space that's been built in our lives in these places where we just have a lot of room to just take a good long look at our hearts and our story, what's hurt us, what taught us certain things. And we often need that space for God to be able to begin to soften our hearts and begin to speak truth to us and begin to challenge some of the beliefs that we've learned. So exile is a place of healing relationship. And then number 4, this is where I've been having to kind of hold myself back so I don't go off into my points for number 4. Number 4, exile is a place of purification. I love this. In the Bible, with the Israelites, there's always a remnant. Have y'all ever read that word in the Bible? God always preserves a remnant. I want to read those 2 definitions. Remnant, a small remaining quantity of something. And the purification, the removal of contaminants from something. So exile is a place of purification, a place of removing contaminants from something, and God always preserves a remnant that He brings back out of exile. We've had family in, so I didn't get time to bullet this out, so I'm just going to read. Am I allowed to do that? I'm going to do it anyway, so I mean, that was I'm just going to read this next part, okay? Exile is a place of purification. The reason exile is a crucial step in our faith walk is because you and I, the pure creation that God made complete in His image, have picked up contaminants along the way that have become malware in our minds and hearts. Malware that prevents us from seeing and defining ourselves, others, and God as we truly are. Lies that have perverted our true identities. Parts that have become burdened. And these contaminants prevent us from living as the image bearers that we are. What I'm saying here, guys, is that when God made us, we weren't made with all of this brokenness. Yes, we were made and placed into a sinful world, into a fallen world, but when we were made perfect. We were made in God's own image. Grandpa had a saying, he always says, God don't make junk. God doesn't make junk. When He formed us in our mother's womb, we were fearfully and wonderfully made. But then we were born into a world full of brokenness, full of sin, full of death, full of destruction. And we began to experience that. We got hurt. We got hurt. We got wounded. We learned things. We picked up names that became names we had for ourselves. We picked up identity items that God didn't give us. We picked it up along the way, contaminants that have prevented us from walking as the true children of God that He has made us to be. Moving on here. So in other words, the God image within me, my true identity, which is secure and firmly established, and all of these verses that we read, like I'm forgiven and free, and I'm a new creation, and all of these kinds of things. Do you guys ever read, we sing it, we read it, we put it on the mirror, whatever. Does it ever feel a little like disconnected? Like we see it in the Bible, but I'm not living that reality. And I'm not sure how to, and I'm just going to keep speaking it over myself, but it doesn't, and that's because we understand it in our heads. We have picked up the knowledge of it, but it hasn't made its way into our hearts where it's actually healed the brokenness. So we're all walking around with a lot of knowledge that hasn't become manifest in our lives because it hasn't healed our heart yet where it will actually do so. Our heart's still got that dry, cracked soil, and we're not experiencing a lot of this fruit. And so we try to worship harder, but it's just a little empty for us because let me tell you something. When God thaws an area of your heart, when God brings healing to something in your life, it's not that hard to worship Him because something inside of you comes alive in that. But when we're just trying to force something from a place of head knowledge, it just isn't there. And I think it's okay that we can just be honest about that. That there's some head knowledge floating around here. There's Bible verses. There's identity truth. There's all this stuff that just hasn't made its way into those broken places of our heart, that's where it will come alive. That's where you will see the light come on, is when it plugs into that place. But it hasn't made it there yet. All right, I got a little lost there. So in other words, the God image within me, my true identity, secure and firmly established, wouldn't feel the need to react to Abby. Here we go, I'm making it personal. When Abby finds fault with or doesn't appropriately appreciate something I've done for her in the hoop house. My secure identity in Christ, the me that is perfectly made, the God image within me, it's not burdened with a lack of worth. It's secure and confident in its worth. You know, I used to be scared to death of public speaking, and that part of me still there a little bit. I still fear you guys a little bit. But there's a place in my heart that's gotten healed a lot, that has come to a place where now I'm living out of that God image that's within me, and I'm confident in it. I'm not worried about it. I don't have to sit here and worry about, what are they thinking of it? Did they think that went well? Or that part of me's healing. Well, there's a place in my heart that, because of things I've been through and things that were told or said or done or things that were taught to me just by what other people were saying and doing, there's contaminants that I picked up along the way that caused me to feel that my worth was largely in what I was able to do or offer you. And so you'll see me do this. Like if I get around somebody that I'm wanting them to accept me, I want them to not reject me, you'll see me start doing stuff. Like Moses. I'll start doing stuff. I'll start fixing squeaky doors, and you didn't ask me to, and I'll start washing dishes, and I'll just kind of go into this Mr. Fix-It mode. And see, that's not the God image within me. That's the broken me that's picked up all of these contaminants, that's learned things about myself that aren't true. The God image within me wouldn't need to do all that. Would be happy to if you asked me to, but it wouldn't have some kind of broken need to, right? But see, that's an area I struggle. And so guess what? When I do a bunch of work on Abby's hoop house for her, and I run water to all her beds, and then she's like, I think I'm just going to water it by hand. See, the God image within me could go, the healed identity, if that were, that version that's out there somewhere that I can become when enough healing takes place, that version of me could go, okay, cool, it's your garden, I don't care, and be perfectly happy with it, and be glad I ran water to the beds, because I like that it's there. But see, the me that has my value all wrapped up in what I can do feels incredibly rejected. Not that she's rejected what I've done, she's rejected me. Because my worth and my value is what I do. And so I have given her this offering that she has now rejected. None of this, of course, she's aware of. But there's a huge storm of stuff going on in me. Is this resonating with you guys a little bit? And so we have all of these kinds of things, and this is where our marriages struggle, and this is where all this kind of stuff happens. So fill in the blank with whatever you've become aware of. But what I want to tell you is that God will let us work at that for a little while, but then He'll lead us into a place of exile, because exile is a place of purification. It's a place where we begin to encounter, with some things off the table, with some space, He begins to encounter those broken places. And He brings special people, I've often noticed. You'll notice this also in those stories. It's not just a story about that person. There's some special people that God brings into those stories alongside of David and Jacob and Joseph and Moses. And those special people become instruments of God's healing, helping that person begin to encounter some of those broken places. To go back to the remnant thing, I want to tell you this. God meets me and works alongside me to remove those contaminants so that only a remnant remains. I want you to know everything that goes everything that goes into exile with you is not meant to come out of exile with you. That's the purpose of exile. That's the point of it. You go in, and here's where a lot of us are at. God has spoken promises over us. Some of them are like the generic promises that we see in the gospel for all of us. Some of them are specific, like God's called me to music or something, right? All of us have these promised lands, and a lot of us we're trying to go there with a bunch of stuff, a bunch of baggage, a lot of all this stuff I'm talking about, the hurts and the wounds and the all of these things that are not working. like I said in point number 2 or 3. These things that aren't working. And we're trying to go in and occupy the land with it, but just like the Israelites, it doesn't work. Because it's a land flowing with milk and honey. And if all of that stuff belonged there, it wouldn't be a land flowing with milk and honey, right? It would detract from the promise of it all. And God's like, and a lot of times we feel rejected because we're held back, or God puts us into a place of exile when we know He's called us to that and we want to go there, and so something must be wrong with us at an identity level. And God's like, no, you are good, but there's a lot around you that doesn't belong there. A lot around you that I don't want with you in there because it would take away from what I've created that to be for you. And so we've got to go through some exile. We've got to go through some purification. We've got to remove some contaminants, not to get you worthy of the promised land, but to get you to a place you can enjoy it, a place you can occupy it and hold on to it. Have you ever been given something that you weren't ready for and you couldn't keep it? A relationship, a position. You were given access to something that you weren't ready to hold on to. There was all of this brokenness I'm talking about within you that made you toxic or made them feel toxic to you or whatever. However all that plays out, that's to work through with your counselor, and I do advise you get one. And you couldn't hold on to it. You burnt the bridge. You lost the position. You soured the relationship. Guys, all of that brokenness, all of those contaminants we've picked up along the way that pollute our true identity, that make us insecure instead of secure, that make us not firmly rooted, would cause us to do the same thing with the land of promise. And so God in His mercy oftentimes will take us on a detour on our way there. He'll lead us into a place of exile, not because we're not worthy of the land of promise, but because we wouldn't be able to hold on to it. Every one of these stories. Actually, before I go there, I want to go to Isaiah 65:9. Y'all see this. Speaking to this remnant of Israel, I will preserve a remnant of the people of Israel who are living in exile at this time, and of Judah to possess my land, the land I have earmarked for them, the land I have promised them, but I will choose who inherits it. I will choose who inherits it, and my servants will live there. And that's what exile is all about, guys. God isn't off somewhere in the distance, impatiently tapping His foot, waiting for you to finally get it. God is with you in the exile. And He is working and refining and purifying and choosing within you what He wants you to take into the land of promise. I will choose who goes into the land. The remnant that I choose, I will take there. Y'all see that? I just thought that was really cool. All right, so I want to go back to our stories that we referenced. Let's go to Jacob first. Jacob learned to trust God with his well-being. The Jacob that was sneaky and tricky and had to trick Esau into giving him his birthright and had to go in and get his blessing by putting all the goat hair on his arms. The Jacob that had to manipulate. When in the land of exile, he learned some things. And he grew in some areas and he learned to trust God with his well-being, not his own cunning. Joseph in the land of exile learned that it was God that made him special. Let me show you this. We have Joseph as a kid here who's like flaunting his coat of many colors and his status and being daddy's favorite. He's not trying to hide it. He's not being humble about it at all. He's flaunting it in his brothers' faces, right? To the point that they're willing to kill him. Brothers fight, but they don't wake up and plan collectively on killing you without there being some backstory there, right? That Joseph, who thinks he's pretty special, in exile, ends up going to Pharaoh. And when Pharaoh wants him to interpret the dream, he says, hey, I can't interpret your dream. Let me ad-lib. There's nothing super special about me, man, I can't do that. But God can do everything, and God can give me the meaning of your dream. But understand, it's God that's doing it. Do you see the shift? Something in Joseph's heart, something that needed to be important and special and whatever. I don't know. He was the youngest child. I'm not a youngest child, but now youngest children, you know. There's something in him that needed that didn't need it over here. You see what I'm saying? Some refinement took place there. Moses learned that it wasn't his job to save the Israelites. The Moses over here that was going to try to, I don't know what his plan was, but the Moses over here that was going to get involved and fix people and all this kind of stuff, that's not the same Moses we see over here at the burning bush that's like, you've picked the wrong guy, I don't speak well. Listen, when I get involved, people die, it doesn't work well, nobody listens to me. And God takes that and he says, hey, it's I made your mouth. I will speak through you. And he roots all of those things and makes Moses secure in him. We see a change that's happened, right? And then the Israelites wandering in the desert. Really, what theirs was about is just coming to a place where they believed that God's heart for them was actually good, right? The Israelites prior to that, as they're going from Egypt to the Promised Land, constantly, like every other chapter, come to a place where they decide God has led them out in the desert to kill them. And see, they had picked up a lot of contaminants in the land of Egypt. I doubt the Egyptian gods were gods of mercy and justice, right? We don't really see that a lot with all of these foreign gods. They need sacrifices, they need all these things, or else bad things are going to happen, right? And so the Israelites, the whole point of that journey was to come to a place of believing that their God was good, that he had a good heart for them. Like I was talking about last week, we all are also dealing with that challenge, coming to believe that God's heart for us is actually good, that he actually has our best interest. And so we see them balk when they get to the Promised Land, and there's something in front of them that's just like, they didn't have that secure belief in a good God that would have given them the courage to go take the land. And so they had to keep going. But the Israelites that came back did. They did believe their God was good, and they did believe they could take the land. Do y'all see how every one of those stories, exile was a process of purification, of whittling, of refinement, until only a remnant remained. And that remnant is the remnant that God always had spoken the promise to. God didn't speak the promise to all this other junk. He saw that remnant back here. And he knew that was the remnant that he was going to take and put in second command of all Egypt. That was the remnant that was going to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. That was the remnant that was going to, you see what I'm saying? And that's the point of exile, guys. It's where we really meet the Jesus I was talking about last week, and he really becomes relevant to the most broken places in our hearts. If what we're doing in church, if what we're reading in the Bible, if all this that we're doing isn't relevant, doesn't encounter that truly broken you that's in there, as I've said before, that little boy or that little girl, that's hung up back there at that moment when that thing happened, and it's still driving your car today. If what we're doing and talking about isn't relevant to that, if it doesn't encounter that, what are we doing? Because I've spent a lifetime in church reading and saying things that did not encounter where I was really hurting, where I was really broken, where I really had issues that desperately needed to encounter. I've found that in exile. The head knowledge has made its way to my heart in exile, in really hard seasons where I was not where I wanted to be, and I was not allowed to go into my land of promise that I desperately wanted to go into. And me and God duked it out, and there was cussing, and there was all kinds of stuff involved. But at the end of the day, he got his remnant. And I'm not saying I've arrived. I'm not saying in every area of my life that that's true. But I will say this, when one thing starts to give, everything else kind of starts to follow suit. Because when we start encountering the real thing in one area, when we start tasting and seeing that God is good in one area, especially in exile, we start wanting more of it. We start learning things that we then are like, well, hold on a minute. And we take it over here, and we heal this area of our hearts. I can see y'all getting antsy, so I'm going to move forward. All right. In closing here, guys, I want you guys that are, I don't know where in your life that you are experiencing a season of exile, or if you are. But for those of you guys that are like, oh yeah, I am. What I want you to know is that That soil that feels like sand to you is a soil that God will use. Well, we don't make dirt paper, sandpaper. That is a precious soil that God will use to refine you and bring about some of the richest and most fertile soil in your heart and in your life. I want you to know that God's with you in exile. He's not way off over there somewhere. You're not the bad kid that He kicked out of class. He's with you in it. You are extremely held by Him in it. And He's taking you somewhere good. The question becomes how much you're going to fight it. How much you're going to fight it. Because, guys, there's two ways I've seen exile done, and there's two ways I've done it. One is kicking and screaming and trying so hard to get over that fence. The other is coming to a place where we accept it, where we surrender to it, and where we, in fact, even embrace it. And when we get to that ladder, when we get to a point where we can embrace it, that's where the work really starts. And that's where we start really seeing God move in our heart and in our life. There was this cartoon, I think DreamWorks put it on, called Joseph, King of Dreams, that I remember watching as a kid. And there's this scene in it, or this montage of scenes in it, where he's in the pit, he's in the prison by himself, and he's angry with God, and he's just like, you told me this, and you promised me that. And then he finally breaks, and he ends up on his face or whatever. And then this song starts playing, and it goes into this montage of him, and he stops fighting it, he stops scaling the walls, and he starts building this rock circular thing that he's planting, and he plants this tree in the middle of it. And the montage is just beautiful because as he's building this thing, it's like flashing back on these seasons of his life. And this tree is getting bigger and bigger. His beard's getting longer, and it's really awesome because, guys, that's what it's like. We can sit there and fight and scale the walls, but sooner or later we come to a place where we break and we bend the knee and we embrace it. And when we do that, God starts working alongside us to build and to grow something that wasn't there before, to bring healing to some of that past stuff, those flashbacks, and He starts to build something right here, and He's preparing you for that purpose, for that promised land. You're closer to what God has spoken over your life than you realize. You think it's way off over there somewhere, but it's really in here, in the work that God is doing in your life. So I just want to encourage you guys to embrace that exile, to embrace that place where you want to be over there, you want to have that over there, but you don't have a choice but be right here. To surrender to God there. Because exile is not a place of consequence for the bad kids. It's a place of love. It's a place of pursuit. It's a place where God is bringing purification, healing the relationship you have with yourself, because that relationship defines the relationship you have with others, the relationship you have with Him. It's a place of healing. You guys bow your heads with me? God, this may not connect for some of us. Some of us may just not be there. Or maybe we need to do some looking too. But God, for some of us, we're in difficult seasons of exile. Seasons of separation from what feels like the promised land that You have spoken over us. And God, I pray for us, because just like we can engage in our relationship with You and see You completely wrong and miss the point, God, we can see a season that we're in, like a season of exile, completely wrong and miss the point. Feel like You're far away when we're actually supposed to, or not supposed to, I don't like to use that word, but we're actually meant to feel You close in that place. And we will, God, when we surrender to You in that. God, when we quit kicking and screaming and fighting, and then You start doing this work of healing in our life that I've been trying to describe, God, and I just pray over all of us. I pray that You would do that work of healing in our lives, God. There's all of these things, there's all of these contaminants that have polluted our identity, that have stolen from us the birthright we have in You to be forgiven and free, to be secure in our identity, to have all of that rooted in You, where our worth isn't in something else. And because it's not in something else, it can't be shaken. But what can be shaken will be shaken. It's what the Bible says, God. And I think a lot of us are experiencing some shaking. And that's You shaking some things loose so that they can get rooted in You, established in You, so that we can quit living these lives where our lives live us drive us and have control over us instead of us having control over our lives. Pray that you would, in these seasons of exile, continue to pursue us and bring healing in our lives, God. Help us surrender to it and to meet the real you in it. And I just pray that that would be the dawn of a new day in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, you guys, Easter's next week. We'll see you there. Have a great week.